Have you ever sat at the wrong table and changed your life forever? Meet Lila Harper, a 26-year-old struggling single mother working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Her days are filled with bills, babysitters, and broken dreams. She's been on one too many blind dates set up by her well-meaning best friend, Chloe. Each date feels like another disappointment in her already chaotic life. Lila is about to give up on love entirely when she reluctantly agrees to one last blind date. A final attempt to prove to herself that maybe, just maybe, there's hope for happiness beyond survival. But what happens when this seemingly ordinary blind date turns out to be anything but? Why does sitting at the wrong table end up being the right decision of her life? Lila Harper had always been a fighter. At just 26 years old, she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, working 2 jobs to support herself and her 5-year-old son, Max. Her days were long, exhausting, and often lonely. Between juggling shifts at the diner and babysitters who sometimes didn't show up, Lila barely had time for herself. But tonight was different, or so she hoped. Her best friend, Chloe, had convinced her to go on one last blind date. "You deserve happiness, Lila," Chloe had said over the phone earlier that day. "Just give it a chance." Reluctantly, Lila agreed. She wasn't expecting much. Most of her previous blind dates had ended in awkward silences or polite excuses to leave early. Still, as she stood in front of her cracked bathroom mirror, applying mascara with trembling hands, she allowed herself a small flicker of hope. Maybe this time would be different. The cafe where the date was supposed to take place was cozy but crowded, filled with the hum of conversation and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Lila arrived late. Max's daycare had called about a minor issue, delaying her, and she felt flustered as she stepped inside. Scanning the room quickly, she spotted an empty table near the back and hurried toward it without looking closely at the man sitting across from her. "Hi," she said breathlessly, sliding into the chair before glancing up. The man opposite her looked surprised but smiled warmly. He was handsome, with dark hair neatly styled and dressed in a crisp button-down shirt. His eyes held a quiet confidence that made Lila feel instantly underdressed in her faded jeans and borrowed sweater. "I'm sorry if I kept you waiting," she began, trying to steady her voice. "I got held up." "No problem at all," he replied smoothly. "Are you meeting someone here?" It took a moment for his question to sink in. Confused, Lila tilted her head. "Aren't you my date?" He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I don't think so. I'm Ethan Caldwell. I'm actually waiting for someone else." Mortified, Lila stammered an apology and started to rise. "Oh no, I must have sat at the wrong table. I'm so sorry." But Ethan gestured for her to stay. "Wait, don't rush off. You seem more interesting than whoever I'm supposed to meet. Besides," he added with a playful grin, "they're late anyway. Why not pass the time chatting?" Though hesitant, Lila found herself agreeing. As they talked, she discovered Ethan worked in finance, a detail he mentioned casually, almost dismissively. He asked thoughtful questions about her life, genuinely interested in her struggles as a single mother. For once, Lila didn't feel judged or pitied. Instead, she felt seen. Just as their conversation deepened, Ethan's phone buzzed. A text notification lit up his screen, revealing a message from his original match canceling their date. Without hesitation, Ethan turned back to Lila. "Looks like fate brought us together instead," he said lightly. As they laughed over shared stories, Lila noticed Ethan discreetly checking stock prices on his phone. Something about the way he tapped the screen made her wonder. Was there more to him than he let on? Over the next few weeks, Lila found herself thinking about Ethan more than she cared to admit. Their accidental meeting had sparked something unexpected, a sense of ease and understanding she hadn't felt in years. When he texted her the day after their cafe encounter, asking if they could meet again, she hesitated only briefly before saying yes. What started as a simple coffee date turned into regular outings, dinners at quiet bistros, walks through the park, and even late-night phone calls when Max was asleep and Lila finally had a moment to herself. Ethan was unlike anyone Lila had ever met. He listened intently when she spoke, his gaze never wavering, as though every word mattered. She told him about her chaotic life, How hard it was to balance work and motherhood, how she often felt like she was failing despite giving everything she had. In return, Ethan shared pieces of his own story. His parents had pushed him relentlessly to succeed, instilling a drive for excellence but leaving little room for personal connections. "I've spent most of my life surrounded by people who want something from me," he confessed one evening. "But with you, it's different. You don't expect anything." For the first time in what felt like forever, Lila allowed herself to dream. Could this be real? Could someone like Ethan truly care about someone like her? Yet, doubt lingered in the back of her mind. There were moments when she caught glimpses of a world far removed from hers, like the way waiters greeted him by name at expensive restaurants or how effortlessly he discussed topics she barely understood. Still, she brushed these thoughts aside, focusing instead on the warmth in his smile and the kindness in his actions. One Friday night, Ethan invited Lila to dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. Nervous about fitting in, Lila borrowed a dress from Chloe, a sleek black number that made her feel both glamorous and out of place. As they walked into the dimly lit dining room, she immediately noticed the change in atmosphere. The patrons were impeccably dressed, their conversations hushed yet confident. Every table seemed to hold secrets whispered in tones of privilege. "This is fancy," Lila murmured, clutching her purse tightly as they were seated. Ethan chuckled softly. "Don't worry, you look perfect." The meal began uneventfully, filled with laughter and easy banter. But midway through dessert, a well-dressed man approached their table, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "Congratulations on the acquisition," the stranger exclaimed, shaking his hand enthusiastically. "That tech company deal must have set records." Lila froze, her fork hovering mid-air. "Acquisition? Tech company?" Her eyes darted to Ethan, whose expression remained calm but unreadable. It wasn't until the man left that Lila fully processed what she'd heard. Leaning forward slightly, she asked cautiously, "What did he mean by acquisition?" Ethan hesitated, then sighed. "There's something I should have told you earlier," he admitted. "I'm not just in finance. I run a multi-billion-dollar investment firm." The words hit Lila like a tidal wave. All the subtle signs she'd ignored suddenly clicked into place. The luxury cars parked outside his apartment building, the tailored suits he wore so casually, the offhand mentions of deals and portfolios, it all made sense now. Feeling betrayed, Lila stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Did you think I wouldn't notice? Or worse, did you think I'd use you?" "I wanted you to see me, not my money," Ethan replied earnestly, standing as well. "Please, let me explain." But Lila couldn't stay. Grabbing her coat, she rushed out of the restaurant, tears blurring her vision. Back home, she collapsed onto her couch, replaying the evening in her mind. Chloe arrived soon after, finding her friend in tears. "He lied to me," Lila sobbed. "How can I trust him now?" Chloe listened patiently, then offered gentle advice. "Maybe he didn't lie because he's hiding something bad, but because he's scared. Scared of being seen as nothing more than a bank account." Later that night, there was a soft knock at Lila's door. Opening it, she found Ethan standing there, holding a bouquet of flowers. His eyes were filled with sincerity and vulnerability. "I know I messed up," he said quietly. "But please, give me a chance to make things right." Would she let him in, or shut him out completely? Lila hesitated at the doorway, her heart pounding as she looked into Ethan's eyes. The flowers in his hands were beautiful, a mix of roses and daisies, but they couldn't erase the turmoil inside her. She wanted to slam the door shut, to protect herself from the pain of betrayal. Yet something in Ethan's expression stopped her, a raw vulnerability that mirrored her own fears. "Please," he said again, his voice soft but steady. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I need you to know I care about you. More than anything." Against her better judgment, Lila stepped aside, letting him in. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Ethan broke it. "I didn't tell you about my wealth because I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid you'd see me differently. Afraid you'd think I'm just another rich guy who thinks money can solve everything." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "But what I feel for you, it's real, Lila. You make me want to be a better person." Lila listened, her anger slowly giving way to confusion. Was this really about protecting her feelings? Or was he trying to shield himself too? "Why didn't you just tell me?" she asked quietly. "Wouldn't honesty have been easier?" Ethan nodded. "You're right. I should have told you sooner. But every time I tried, I chickened out. What if you pulled away? What if you thought I wasn't good enough for you?" His admission caught her off guard. For all his success, Ethan carried insecurities just like everyone else. Slowly, tentatively, Lila reached out, placing a hand over his. "We both have walls we've built," she said softly. "Maybe it's time we started tearing them down." Over the next few weeks, they worked on rebuilding trust. Ethan made an effort to include Lila in parts of his life he'd kept hidden before, introducing her to close friends, inviting her to casual gatherings where no one cared about titles or bank accounts. In return, Lila opened up about her own struggles, sharing how hard it had been to raise Max alone and how much she feared being judged for her choices. Their connection grew stronger, but outside forces threatened to pull them apart. One afternoon, Lila overheard co-workers gossiping during her shift at the diner. "Did you hear about Lila?" one of them whispered. "She's dating some millionaire now. Probably using him to climb the social ladder." The words stung more than Lila expected. Humiliated, she avoided Ethan for days, convinced that everyone would see their relationship the same way. When Chloe confronted her about it, Lila broke down. "What's the point of fighting for something if people are always going to judge us?" she cried. Chloe hugged her tightly. "Because love isn't about what other people think. It's about what you feel. Don't let fear ruin something beautiful." Taking her friend's advice to heart, Lila decided to confront the issue head-on. She arranged to meet Ethan at a quiet park near her apartment. As they walked along the path, she explained what she'd heard and how it made her feel. To her surprise, Ethan didn't dismiss her concerns. Instead, he took her hands in his. "I hate that people are treating you this way," he said firmly. "Let me handle it." The very next day, Ethan showed up at the diner during Lila's shift. Standing in front of the gossipy co-workers, he addressed them directly. "I understand curiosity," he began, his tone calm but commanding. "But spreading rumors about someone you don't even know is unacceptable. Lila deserves respect, not judgment." The room fell silent, and though Lila felt exposed, she also felt a surge of gratitude. Ethan wasn't just defending her. He was standing by her side when she needed him most. As their bond deepened, Lila began to envision a future with Ethan, one where she didn't have to hide who she was or apologize for her past. But just as things seemed to settle, disaster struck. Late one evening, after putting Max to bed, Lila received a call from the hospital. Her son needed emergency surgery, and the costs were astronomical. Panic gripped her chest as she realized she couldn't afford it, not even close. How could she face this crisis without pushing Ethan further away? The call from the hospital replayed in Lila's mind like a broken record. "Max needs emergency surgery," the doctor had said. "It's urgent." The words had hit her like a freight train, leaving her breathless and terrified. She sat on the edge of her bed, clutching the phone, tears streaming down her face as she tried to process what this meant. Ethan arrived within minutes of her text, his expression grave but determined. "Tell me everything," he said gently, sitting beside her. Lila hesitated, guilt gnawing at her insides. How could she ask him for help without feeling like she was taking advantage? But the reality was stark. She couldn't afford the surgery on her own. Even with insurance, the out-of-pocket costs were astronomical. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice breaking. I can't pay for this." Ethan placed a reassuring hand on hers. "You're not alone anymore, Lila. Let me help." "No," she replied firmly, pulling away. "I can't let you do that. It's too much. You've already done so much for me." "Love isn't about keeping score," Ethan countered. "This is your son, and he's important to me too." Please, let me be here for you both." His words tugged at her heart, but pride held her back. Over the next few days, Lila wrestled with her emotions. She considered every option, borrowing money, selling what little she owned, but nothing came close to covering the expenses. Meanwhile, Ethan stayed by her side, offering silent support when words failed. Finally, one evening, as they sat together in her small living room, Ethan proposed a solution. "What if we worked together?" he suggested. "I'll invest in your dream, the bakery you've always wanted to open. That way, you'll have financial stability and independence. And in the meantime, I'll cover Max's medical bills." Lila stared at him, stunned. A bakery had been her dream since before Max was born, but she'd pushed it aside, thinking it was impossible. Now, Ethan was offering her a lifeline, not as charity, but as a partnership. "I don't want you to feel obligated," she said cautiously. "It's not obligation," Ethan assured her. "It's faith. Faith in you and your strength. You've been carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders for too long. Let me share the load." Touched but wary, Lila agreed to consider his offer. As they began planning the bakery, their bond deepened further. Ethan helped her draft business plans, scout locations, and even design the menu. For the first time in years, Lila allowed herself to dream again, to imagine a future where she wasn't just surviving but thriving. But just as things seemed to fall into place, complications arose. Reporters somehow caught wind of their relationship, painting Lila as a manipulative opportunist using Ethan for his wealth. Headlines mocked her struggles, calling her a gold digger, and questioning Ethan's judgment. One particularly cruel article reduced Lila to tears. "They'll never see me as anything more than the poor girl," she sobbed to Chloe over the phone. Chloe's response was firm. "Then show them who you really are. Prove them wrong." Inspired, Ethan took matters into his own hands. He called a press conference, addressing the rumors directly. "Lila Harper is one of the strongest, most resilient people I've ever met," he declared, his voice unwavering. "She doesn't need my money, she has her own dreams, her own ambitions. Together, we're building something meaningful. If anyone has a problem with that, then frankly, I don't care." To further demonstrate his commitment, Ethan announced he would sell off part of his business empire to fund charitable initiatives supporting single mothers, a cause inspired by Lila's journey. The move silenced critics and earned widespread admiration, but more importantly, it restored Lila's faith in him, and in herself. With Max's surgery scheduled and the bakery nearing completion, Lila faced a final hurdle: the grand opening event. Would she attend alongside Ethan, embracing their love publicly despite the scrutiny, or step back to avoid further judgment? The morning of the bakery's grand opening dawned bright and clear, but Lila woke up feeling anything but calm. Her stomach churned as she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her apron for the 100th time. Today was supposed to mark the beginning of her dream, a culmination of hard work, sacrifice, and faith, but all she could think about was the crowd outside. Would people show up? Would they judge her? Or worse, would they ignore her entirely? Ethan noticed her anxiety immediately. "Hey," he said softly, stepping into the small kitchen behind her. "You've got this. Everyone who matters already knows how incredible you are." Lila managed a shaky smile. "What if I mess it up? What if?" "No what ifs," Ethan interrupted gently. "Today is about celebrating you. Not just the bakery, but everything you've overcome to get here." His words steadied her nerves, if only slightly. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. "Okay. Let's do this." When they arrived at the bakery, Lila was astonished by what awaited her. The line stretched down the block, filled with familiar faces. Friends, neighbors, even some of her regular customers from the diner. Chloe waved enthusiastically from the front, holding Max's hand. And then there was Ethan, standing proudly beside her, ready to support her every step of the way. As the doors opened, Lila greeted each customer with gratitude, sharing stories about her recipes and the inspiration behind them. The warmth in people's smiles reassured her that this wasn't just another business, it was a community. Midway through the event, Ethan stepped forward, tapping a spoon against a glass to get everyone's attention. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice warm and inviting. When the room quieted, he turned to Lila. "I know this day is about celebrating your amazing bakery," he began, "but I also want to take a moment to thank you for teaching me what true strength looks like. For showing me that love isn't about perfection, it's about partnership. And for proving that no matter how tough life gets, you can still create something beautiful." He paused, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple yet elegant ring. "Lila Harper, will you marry me?" Gasps rippled through the crowd as Lila froze, tears welling in her eyes. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then, with a laugh that dissolved into sobs, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Of course, yes." The room erupted in applause as Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, pulling her into a hug. In that moment, Lila felt lighter than she had in years, as though all the burdens she'd carried were finally lifted. Just as the celebration reached its peak, a courier arrived with an envelope addressed to Lila. Opening it, she found a letter from her estranged father, whom she hadn't heard from in over a decade. "Dear Lila," it read, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wanted to apologize for abandoning you and your mother. I see now how much I missed, the pain I caused, the memories I'll never have. If you're willing, I'd like to try to make amends. You and Max mean the world to me, even if I haven't shown it." Her hands trembled as she finished reading. Part of her wanted to dismiss the letter outright, to let anger and hurt win. But looking around at the people who loved her, who believed in her, she realized she didn't have to carry resentment anymore. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing the past, it was about freeing herself from it. Later that evening, surrounded by Ethan, Max, and Chloe, Lila made a decision. She would reach out to her father, not because she owed him anything, but because she deserved peace. A year later, the bakery thrived, becoming a staple in the neighborhood. Lila and Ethan were married, their love stronger than ever. Max adored Ethan, calling him Dad without hesitation, and together they built a family rooted in trust, resilience, and joy. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Lila stood behind the counter, watching as customers laughed and chatted. Her father sat at a corner table with Max, playing a board game while Ethan refilled coffee cups nearby. For so long, Lila had believed happiness was out of reach, that life was nothing more than a series of struggles to endure. But sitting at the wrong table on a blind date had led her to everything she'd ever dreamed of, and more. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the room, Lila smiled. Sometimes, fate had a way of bringing people exactly where they needed to be, even if it started with a simple mistake.